So before I go into my actual topic, I would say that these are the various subtopics or various topics that I would be discussing upon in the next half an hour. And before I actually start the topic, I want to start with the aging effect of the ovary on the woman. When a female child is born, they are born with 1 to 2 million germ cells. And by the time they reach puberty or menarche, these follicles will come down to actually 3 or 4,000 follicles, that is 3 or 4 lakhs of follicles. So there is great reduction in the numbers by the time they reach puberty itself. And by the time they reach 35 to 37 years of age, it goes down even further. And this reduction in numbers happen quite fast in Indian women. So that is the point which we need to keep in mind when we are treating our women in our infertility clinics. And this is a very old study published in 1986. And you can see this is a natural conception rates in women across the age groups. As the age of the woman increases, the natural conception rates are going down. This is mainly because of the numbers of the follicle that is going down and also the egg quality, the ovarian oocyte quality that goes down. And the same thing is depicted in this in a different way. Here, we talk about the follicles and also the fertility capacity of the woman across the decades. Here you can see the number of follicles. This is a curve which shows the number of follicles which is going down as a woman ages. And this curve represents a miscarriage rate. And if you look at these, here you can see the optimal fertility of the woman, that is between 20 and 30 years of age, when she has a maximum number of follicles in the ovary. And from 30 itself, the fertility capacity declines. And this is one point which I want all of you to note. We think that once the woman starts irregular cycles, that is the point when the fertility will stop. But no, the end of fertility or the end of the reproductive capacity starts even before the period irregular cycle starts in the woman. So that is very important point to take home. So we shouldn't wait for the periods to become irregular and then start fertility treatment or IVF treatments. So it's better once you decide that the woman needs treatment, it's better that we do it early rather than wait, delay, and then at the end of the fertility potential, we refer the patient to the fertility specialist. This is a very crucial point for all the gynecologists and also for the fertility specialists when deciding on the treatment for that particular woman. So what is poor ovarian reserve? Till 2011, there are many definitions which have been put forward by many authors. In a meta-analysis that has been done of 47 RCTs, randomized controlled trials, 41 definitions have been found. So it is so vast and heterogeneous. So that is the reason why it was very difficult to identify the poor responder, to classify them, and also to come to a conclusion regarding how we treat them, and also what is the prognosis for these type of women who have low ovarian reserve. So basically they used to look at the day 3 FSH level. Some people regarded previous response to stimulation as important indicator of poor ovarian response. Some regarded as a number of mature follicles that a woman develops during ovarian stimulation, so on and so forth. So that is the reason why ESHRE, the European Society, has come up with a criteria called Bologna criteria in 2011. According to this, they consider 3 factors. One is the age of the woman. If the woman is more than 40 years, then we can expect that she might be a poor responder to ovarian stimulation. If she produces less than 3 oocytes in conventional stimulation protocol, again, that is one of the factor. And if she has poor ovarian reserve, when I say poor ovarian reserve, either the antral follicle count is less than 5 to 7 follicles in both the ovaries together, or the AMH less than 0.5 to 1.1 nanograms per ml. And two of the three criteria should be met to be called as women as having expected poor ovarian response or already a poor responder. So these are the other criteria that they have put forward. So here you can see the term poor ovarian response refers to the poor ovarian response, and therefore one stimulated cycle should always be done. So without that cycle we can't say, but the exception is women who are older and also who have advanced maternal age and or along with poor ovarian reserve test, that is, and poor antral follicle count or AMH levels. And these are the risk factors: maternal age more than 40 years or any other previous surgeries or chemotherapy. All these are considered as risk factors. So, but there are some drawbacks that have been found since 2011. These are that they included a heterogeneous group of women. So they did not classify according to the age. They did not take into consideration that the quality of the egg will go down with the age of the woman. And they also did not recommend any clinical decision depending upon the diagnosis or the management process of these women. They just defined the category of poor ovarian responders in women. So that is why a new classification has been developed in 2016 by a group of infertility specialists in Europe. So this is called patient-oriented strategies encompassing individualized oocyte numbers. And this is in short called Poseidon criteria. So according to this, they have divided these women into 4 groups. Group 1 is where the woman is less than 35 years. They already had one cycle of IVF and they had good normal ovarian reserve markers, that is normal AMH or normal AFC, but their expected number of eggs were higher and their actual number of eggs that were retrieved were less. That is called as Poisson group 1. The same applies to group 2, but the only difference is they are older than 35 years. So in general, when you classify these two groups, it is unexpected poor ovarian response in spite of having good ovarian reserve markers. That is, good antral follicle count or normal AMH was present, but after stimulation, they have produced less number of eggs. Then coming to the group 3 and group 4. Here, we expect a poor ovarian response in this, but still they haven't undergone any stimulation. Again, depending on the age, in group 3, they are under 35 years of age, and in group 4, these women are older than 35, but they have poor ovarian reserve markers. That is a common factor between 3 and 4. So again, this group has come up with measures of success. So how can we identify or, or find out the success rate in these women? So there are 2 markers here. One is the follicle to oocyte index. That is, when you start stimulating a woman, you will definitely do an antral follicle count in the day 2 or day 3 when you start the stimulation. So you will assess the number of antral follicles the woman has, and at the end of the cycle, how many oocytes have been found, how many oocytes have been retrieved. So most of the times we say that 70% of the follicles will have eggs. Suppose if the woman has 10 follicles and after stimulation we got only 3 or 4 oocytes, that means she has low follicle to oocyte index, and that is a point to have concern about. So what are the causes? Why should the woman get less number of eggs when compared to other women with the same of the same age, of the same category? So these are the various pointers of problems. So either the woman is put on a low gonadotroph starting dose, so that could be the cause why she got less number of oocytes, or there might be some genetic problem within the receptors in the FSH that have caused a resistance in the woman, or asynchronous follicular development that happens in older women. So the follicle will start growing uh, ahead of other follicles so that the others are suppressed. So that could cause reduction in the number of oocytes that we get at the end of the stimulation. Or there could be some mismanagement during the stimulation process, or an early trigger was given, or the oocyte pickup was difficult or not properly done. So these are some of the factors that would reduce the number of oocytes collected when compared with the number of antral follicles that were expected in that particular woman. So the other parameter that they have put across is the ART calculator. Here, what they would do is they want to find out how many oocytes are needed from these Posidone group of 1 to 4 groups, and to achieve one euploid blastocyst. That is their criteria. Suppose if a woman could produce one euploid blastocyst, then the expected success rate in that particular woman is around 50 to 60%. And the number of oocytes that are needed to achieve this one euploid blastocyst varies depending upon various factors, but the most important is age. So that is why in this ART calculator, they have put the female age as an important one. And also the other important factor is the sperm source, whether it is ejaculated sperm, whether it is testicular sperm or sperm from the epididymis aspirated by epididymal sperm aspiration. Then the user itself will decide what is the probability of pregnancy in that particular patient that he is or she is expecting, and then when they plus on the calculate, will get the number of mature oocytes needed in that particular woman, so that she can achieve one euploid blastocyst. So depending on this, they will assess the probability, and there is another calculator once a stimulation is done, and in this we will put the female age and also the number of mature oocytes retrieved in the stimulation process. And again here the probability will be put by the user itself, and this will give us the probability of getting one euploid blastocyst, so that that particular woman will be able to achieve pregnancy. So depending on this, they have formulated that how to manage these various groups of Posidone group poor ovarian reserve women. So basically, in a nutshell, what they said was, we have to individualize the stimulation protocol, especially in these group 3 and group 4 women. And when I say individualize, in the next few slides, I will tell you what are the points we need to take into consideration. And also we should look at the individualization of trigger strategies, and also the stimulation protocols, along with addition of adjuvant therapies. That's what my whole talk will be about. And they also have proposed that pre-treatment with estradiol or oral contraceptive pills will give synchronization of the follicular cohort, so that the asynchronization will be overcome, and then we'll get more number of mature oocytes. And the other method that they have proposed is the dual stimulation, where previously we were doing only one stimulation in the follicular phase, but now they have proposed that we'll do two stimulations, one in the follicular phase, we retrieve the eggs, and then we'll continue doing the second stimulation in the luteal phase, so that we can add on to the eggs we got in the follicular phase. And the studies have shown that there is no difference in the success rate of the embryos that are retrieved from the follicular phase to the luteal phase embryos. And they recommended recombinant FSH to be used, in contrast to the in contrast to the urinary gonadotrophins that were being popularly used in the conventional stimulation protocol for poor responders. Then coming to the dose. Ideal dose for this type of women is 300 international units, and they are also suggested in order to get a better success rate and better number of oocytes. More or less is the same even in the group 1 and group 2, but so that is what that is about Posidone classification. And before I go into further diagnosis and management, I would like to take you through the slides about the causes and where we can intervene, so that most of our women would not fall into this difficult scenario. So if you look at the broad category, what is the cause? Either it is because the follicle depletion happens very fast, or there is ovarian follicle dysfunction. Depletion depends upon the number of follicles that are present initially, or if there is an accelerated loss. Many a times there is a big dilemma saying that if you keep on stimulating women, the antral follicle count will go down. Actually, that is not true. The number of antral follicle count, the number of antral follicles that are reduced over a period of time depend. It happens continuously whether you stimulate the woman or not. The woman will lose around 30 to 50 follicles per day, depending upon the age of the woman. If as the age increases, the number of follicles lost per day increases. So our stimulation will definitely not increase the risk of poor ovarian reserve or the chance of having poor ovarian reserve. So that is one point that I want to put across. So these are the actual causes. We have already discussed about age and BMI. The women who have high BMI are also at increased risk of having reduced ovarian reserve, and genetic causes in the sense that they are less responding to the gonadotropin injections. So this is one study which looked at the poor responders and good responders, and these are the demographic features. So as the age of the woman is more than 35, the chance of having poor response is more. In the same way, working women and women who are in the urban cities, they are more at risk of developing poor ovarian reserve when compared to their counterparts. And surprisingly, smoking did not have any effect on the response of the woman, which is not true. And the mean age of the mother's menopause also had a significant impact on the response of the woman. And mean duration of subfertility. If, uh, if the duration of subfertility is more, the chances of women responding poor is more. And in the same way, BMI also is one of the factors. So one of the practical points I want to put forth through this study is, she is a 26-year-old. She had previous history of PCOS, but she did not conceive for a few years. So after ovarian stimulation, after IUIs, I have started her on IVF. She had poor response. We had only 2 embryos in both the IVF cycles. So finally, when we went back and looked at her past history, she had LEOs, laparoscopic ovarian drilling, 2 years back. And this is the picture that I got. So here you can see the ovaries. Most of it is punctured, and the normal dictum is that we only do 4 punctures. But here multiple punctures are done across both the ovaries. So this is a cause of poor response in this woman after 2 years of the surgery. So this is a common finding that we all come across. Initially, the woman will have a polycystic ovarian appearance. That means she will have more than 12 follicles in each of the ovaries, and slowly after the LEOs, within 1.5 to 2 years, they go into the stage of poor ovarian reserve women. That is mainly because of this LEOs. Most of the women might conceive with LEOs, but the women who don't conceive with LEOs end up in this stage and with this problem. So it is very crucial that we as gynecologists be very careful when doing the LEOs. Before we do LEOs, we have to see that that particular woman needs it. We have to assess her ovarian volume, we have to assess her antral follicle count and the AMH value before we go for LEOs. It's not that, okay, we have gone through, she's going through laparoscopy anyway, and then we'll drill the ovaries. It shouldn't be that process, but only women who have PCOS, definite PCOS, then only they should be having ovarian drilling. These are the other genetic causes of premature ovarian failure. Turner syndrome is one of the examples of that, where the woman, because of the lack of the other X chromosome, the follicles become atretic. Sometimes the mosaics will be there. So always in women who have poor ovarian reserve, it's better that we do a karyotyping before we offer them any fertility treatments. And sometimes the FSH receptor mutations and FMRH3 mutations can also cause premature ovarian failure. So we all know that smoking reduces ovarian reserve, pollution, bisphenols, and stress And some of the occupations can have impact on the ovarian reserve of the woman. Mainly, what I have noticed is women who have been exposed to agriculture work, like who have been using pesticides and insecticides, they are more at risk of losing their ovarian reserve early in their life. Chemotherapy, like alkylating agents, can cause reduction in ovarian reserve. And then surgery. This is a iatrogenic cause of poor ovarian reserve. When we are operating on the woman, especially young girls and young women, for any ovarian cysts, we should be very, very cautious. We should be cautious in saving the healthy ovary, and we should only subject these women to ovarian cystectomies only if it is needed, 100% needed. Just hemorrhagic cysts or just corpus luteal cysts, if you happen to see there is no need to do operations, we can ask the patient to come back in 6 weeks or 8 weeks time, recheck on the scan if the cysts are still present, and then only we'll go for the procedure. And oophorectomy, previously it is very commonly done procedure for torsions and for any cysts, but nowadays most of us are like avoiding this type of procedure in young women and young girls. And ovarian drilling I have already explained, and in fact even tubal surgeries can cause reduction in blood supply in the and reduce the poor ovarian reduce the ovarian reserve in the ovaries. So even ectopic surgery, we should be very cautious in removing the tube. And also salpingectomy is another cause of reduction in ovarian reserve. So why should we be identifying the ovarian reserve of the woman? And what is the main reason why we should classify these women? So here you can see the pregnancy rates of the women across poor responders and normal responders by different authors, and almost 50% reduction in pregnancy rates in women who are having poorer response or less than 2 or 3 follicles when compared to women who are normal responders. There is significant difference in the pregnancy rates. And the probability of pregnancy also varies depending on the age of the woman. If the woman is less than 37 years, even though she is a poor responder, the pregnancy rates are better when compared to women who is more than 37 years and a poor responder. So if she is a poor responder and she is more than 37 years, the chances of pregnancy are very, very less. In the same way, the cumulative pregnancy rate also you can see is 70% in normal responders, and it's only 23% in poor responders when they have done 3 cycles of IVF. So again, the cycle cancellation rates and the number of oocytes are less than 4 oocytes that have been retrieved across different age groups. So you can see as the age of the woman increases, the cancellation rate, this is the purple bar, is increasing, and at the same time the percentage of women who get less than 4 oocytes is also increasing. So that is the reason why we have to identify these poor responders before start of treatment, so that we can plan our treatment appropriately. We can counsel the patient regarding the prognosis and the success rates. And if suppose the patient, if we tell the patient that she's above 40, she has poor ovarian reserve, and she has only 10% or 5% success rate, then they might opt to a donor cycle IVF than going with their self cycle. So to counsel the patient before the procedure, this is very crucial. And what are the various diagnostic modalities that you will use to identify the poor responders? So antral follicle count by scan, AMH level. Previously we were using FSH and E2 together, but now that has come down. And ovarian volume was also an important marker at one point of time, but now that is not important. That has not been that important or relevant when we have antral follicle count and AMH that are more relevant and significant in identifying the prognosis. And again, beyond all this, if a patient has a stimulation cycle And depending upon the stimulation and the number of follicles that she has developed, that is the best indicator of ovarian reserve of the patient. So antral follicle count. Antral follicle count is the count of the follicles which are between 2 to 8 millimeters in size, and ideally should be done in both the ovaries. And when you sweep the ovaries across, you should be able to count all the follicles that you see and add together from both the ovaries. And then it, it should be linked with the age of the woman to find out the success rate of that particular woman. And in the same way, antral follicle count can vary between person to person. It depends on the resolution of the scan machine that you are using, and also in the time of the cycle that you are doing in. If the woman has a dominant follicle, it can suppress the other follicles, so we might have a spuriously low ovarian reserve. So that is the reason why we should be doing antral follicle count best in the early follicular phase, that is between day 1 and day 5. So AMH and antral follicles both are, we are looking at the same type of follicles. They are pre-antral and small antral follicles. But the advantage with AMH is it is reproducible and it stays same throughout the cycle, and intercycle variability is very minimal and good predictor of ovarian response. When I say ovarian response, this is a response to stimulation in IVF cycles. But the only disadvantage is availability of the technique near us, and also it is a little bit expensive. I personally prefer doing antral follicle count than AMH because I do my own scan, so it is very convenient for me to assess the reserve of the woman there and then and talk to the patient immediately. So when you have the opportunity to do the scan, it's always better that we do the antral follicle count than wait for anti-Mullerian hormone to come. So coming to the management of poor responders. So what are the important things that you need to consider to improve the success rate of these poor responders or women with poor ovarian reserve? So there were various protocols that have been tried and tested, but none of them have shown any benefit over the other. These are the various things, and there are a lot of adjuvants that have been used also to improve the success rate. So that's what I'm going to talk in the next few slides before I finish. So GnRH agonist and antagonist, which one is better? So initially they said there is no difference in number of oocytes and pregnancy rates. Then Sunkara said that there is increase in the number of oocytes and pregnancy rate. And then in 2016 again they said there is no difference. Finally, there was a meta-analysis of 14 randomized control trials done very recently, and they have noticed that whether you do a GnRH agonist long protocol or a GnRH antagonist short protocol, the live birth rates and clinical pregnancy rates are almost similar. There is no statistically significant difference in these two regimes of stimulation. Then does giving high doses of gonadotropins help? Again, initially there were few studies saying that yes, it will improve the response and it will reduce cancellation rates. But when they look at finally at the pregnancy rates, there is no difference whether you give high doses or low doses. So here, this is a study which looked at giving 150 IU of gonadotropins compared with 300 IU of gonadotropins. The number of oocytes got or the pregnancy rates were similar in both the groups. So this is a recent guideline published by American Society of Reproduction in 2018, where they have compared mild stimulation IVF. So what they said was the pregnancy rates are similar. So mild stimulation, even if you reduce the dose of stimulation, the clinical pregnancy rates are same. Whether you add gonadotropins to oral agents to gonadotropins, or you use low dose gonadotropins on their own, or you give high dose gonadotropins in a conventional protocol, the clinical pregnancy rates are same. But the advantage of adding oral agents is it will reduce your cost because the need for gonadotropins will be less. And mild ovarian stimulation is, that's why, cost effective, and obviously live birth rates are low in both groups. So the other molecule that was studied a lot was LH supplementation during gonadotropin stimulation. So initially they said that there is increase in pregnancy rate in women who use recombinant LH during stimulation, but there are so many other studies which were contradictory to that. So this meta-analysis in 2016, which included 847 patients and 8 RCTs, said that there is no difference in pregnancy rate. And there are a few studies which were published recently last year, who said that there is benefit, but in a particular group of women, that is women who are between 36 to 39 years and who already had treatment and who were having unexpected hypo response to recombinant FSH, that is group 1 and group 2 poisson group, or 36 to 39, that is group 4 poisson group. If you add 75 to 150 IU of recombinant LH from day 1 of stimulation, it will be beneficial. And again, Humedin, after this meta-analysis, has done a randomized control trial with a good number of population, and then he said there is no difference in pregnancy rates. But a subgroup analysis showed that women who are severely having poor response, ovarian response, or who are older and who has moderate difference in poor ovarian reserve, they have better pregnancy rates and less miscarriage rate by adding recombinant LH. Then double stimulation, which I have already spoken about. So there will be stimulation both during follicular phase and luteal phase, and both the eggs and embryos will be frozen, and they will be used in a frozen transfer cycle. And the rate of blastocyst formation is increased from 42% to 65%, which is quite significant. So previously in women who are not able to produce follicles or many follicles, natural cycle IVF was done. And the first IVF baby whose birth we are celebrating yesterday was also born out of natural cycle IVF. So there were quite a few studies which were comparing natural cycle IVF with conventional IVF or microdose flare IVF. And some studies have shown that there is improvement in pregnancy rates or better pregnancy rates in women with poor ovarian reserve. And there are some studies which said that adding letrozole in these women can lower the dose of FSH needed and reduce the cost, and there is slight increase in the pregnancy rates in certain categories. And the other molecule that is tested quite frequently is testosterone and testosterone derivatives. Testosterone is supposed to be used either with the transdermal patches or in a gel form, and the dose that we use is 10 to 12.5 milligrams, and it should be started 2 to 4 weeks before we start treatment of stimulation. And what does the study show? Initial study said that there is no significant improvement, and then we have only observational studies, and then the Cochrane review in 2015 said that there is improvement of pregnancy rates by adding testosterone. The other testosterone molecule derivative is dehydroepiandrosterone. This is a precursor of testosterone. We all have been using quite commonly in the poor ovarian reserve women, and the dose recommended is 75 milligrams daily, and we should be using this DHEA 3 months before we start the stimulation. And suppose in a gynecological practice, if you see a woman who is older or who is having poor ovarian reserve, either low AMH or a low FC count, it is better to start her on DHEA. So initially there was so many ups and downs in regarding the response to this DHA molecule. First, it was Gleicher who said that it is very useful in poor ovarian response women and in older women, but later studies have defied that. But again, you can see in these latest studies in 2015 and 2019, the meta-analysis have said that improved live birth rate is seen and the evidence is moderate. So what they said is that if we can have more numbers and a bigger randomized control trial, we can conclude it in a better way. And then this is a 2019 meta-analysis. Again, the numbers are very small, but they have showed that the number of oocytes retrieved after DHA usage is more, the clinical pregnancy rate is better, and live birth rate has improved. So, what is the effect of DHA on miscarriage? It was also studied, and this is from the registry, National US Registry, and these are the miscarriages that are noted in the national population, and these are the miscarriages. The dark green are the miscarriages noted in women who have used DHA, and definitely DHA has shown reduction in the miscarriage rates. And some studies have looked at the aneuploidy rates after usage of DHA, and aneuploidy rates are less when compared to the control groups when DHA is used. Then the other molecule which is coming up recently is coenzyme Q10. This is a scavenger of free radicals, and it acts by protecting against oxidative stress and damage that is caused in the mitochondria and DNA. And it decrease in coenzyme Q10 levels have been noted in elderly women, and usage of coenzyme Q10 has reduced disjunction problems in aging oocytes, and decrease in CoQ10 has been correlated to decrease in fertility in some of the studies. And these are the problems that we see come across because of aging: defects in chromatid separation, defects in chromosome condensation, and spindle detachment, and which would lead to chromosome malalignment and aneuploidy in oocytes. So this is where CoQ10 will come handy by improving the mitochondrial performance, decreasing the chromosome disjunction, and decreasing the chromosome abnormalities. So the other hormone that is also tried along with stimulation is growth hormone. It has synergistic effect with FSH, and it acts directly and also through insulin-like growth factor 1. And the dosage we use is 12 international units for 7 to 10 days of stimulation starting from day 1 of stimulation. And what does the study say about this? Again, there is controversial data. Some studies said that there is increase in pregnancy rates and live birth rates, and we had to treat 6 women to increase to achieve one pregnancy. This is in 2009. And then the recent studies have said that there is significant increase in live birth rate, but some studies now again came back 360 degrees or 180 degrees saying that there is no improvement in live birth rate. So again, we just have to wait and see till we get a large randomized trial to confirm or refute the benefit of growth hormone. So what are the other interventions that we can use to improve the pregnancy rates in this poor ovarian disease woman? Does doing ICSI over IVF help? No. No, it was noted that there is no significant difference in pregnancy rates whether you do IVF or ICSI. It's a big misconception that ICSI will increase the pregnancy rates, but definitely not. And day 2 versus day 3 transfer, this is a very old study, but they have said that transfer on day 2 in poor ovarian disease women gives a better pregnancy rate when compared to day 3. And what are the recent advances that we come across in this category of treatment? It is platelet-rich plasma usage. Nowadays we are using this in various fields of medicine like dermatology, orthopedics, and it is also useful. It is postulated that it can be useful in women who have endometrium problems and ovarian problems. The main dictum behind the use of platelet plasma is it is a rich source of cytokines and growth factors, so it helps improve or rejuvenate the ovaries with the undermined follicles, and so we can see increase in the number of antral follicle count and pregnancy rates. But unfortunately till now we don't have any RCTs done on this. And then stem cells are also have also been tried, which are derived from the bone marrow, and it is delivered into the ovarian artery. And they have noted that residual follicles got activated by stem cells, and there is improvement in antral follicle count, and also there is improvement in the spontaneous pregnancy rate and also pregnancy rate post embryo transfers. But there are only few case reports, but we don't have any observational studies or randomized control trials. So coming to my final few slides. So they definitely, women who have poor ovarian reserve have higher cancellation rates, less number of oocytes, and a few embryos for embryo transfer. So that is the main problem that we come across in these women. And how do we prevent the women from having this poor response? First and foremost is educating the women and girls about problems in delaying their pregnancies, delaying marriages, because we Indian women, the ovarian reserve comes down quite quickly. In the Western world, they say 35 years is a cutoff mark when the ovarian reserve starts coming down. But in India, we have done a study from Nova IVF, and they said that from 28-30 years itself, our ovarian reserve will start coming down. So we have to be extra cautious when the girls are planning to delay pregnancy. If planning to delay marriage or pregnancy, it's always better to advise the woman to look at her ovarian reserve at least every 6 months or 1 year, depending upon her actual age, and take an action depending upon the ovarian reserve. If the woman really wants to delay the pregnancy and her ovarian reserve is coming down, then it's better that she freezes her eggs. And what is the best point to freeze the egg? Is earlier the better. The younger the woman is, the better the chance of the woman to preserve her fertility than at the age of 35 or 40. And proper diet and regular exercise to achieve optimal body weight. In all parts of life, it will help. And smoking definitely will reduce the ovarian reserve, so stop smoking. And administration of GnRH agonist during chemotherapy in young women. We always have the option of freezing the oocytes before subjecting the woman for any type of chemotherapy or radiotherapy. But if there is not enough time to freeze the oocytes, at least to save the ovaries, we should be giving a course of GnRH agonist depot injection before the girl or the woman goes for chemotherapy. And avoiding unnecessary ovarian surgery is also a crucial important factor. And then early diagnosis and appropriate referral to tertiary centers when there is a doubt that the woman has poor ovarian response. To summarize, poor responders are not a homogeneous group, they are heterogeneous group. They can happen in any age, at any age. And prognosis for these patients varies depending upon patient characteristics, mainly age and the actual number of oocytes or the follicles that are there in women. So always, if you see a woman with poor ovarian reserve, we should advise them to reduce weight, stop smoking. We should give higher doses for if they have responded poorly in the previous stimulation. And we can consider adding recombinant LH if using recombinant FSH. And alternatives can be tried after initial uh, use of different protocol. And definitely poor responders can get pregnant, but it might be a little bit longer uh, path than usual normal responders. They can have children, and poor responders have a better prognosis. Thank you so much for your patient, pleasant hearing. Uh, and once again thank Sheel for giving me this opportunity to be among with you all today. And I wish you all a happy embryologist day.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words. It was an excellent presentation, and especially the point which you mentioned about the Indian women, where the reserve actually starts declining from 30 years. So that's a very crucial point, and it's very useful. So thank you very much. I have a very short presentation, so I'll quickly go through that. I'm sharing my screen. Is it visible? So I'm Dr. Prachi from Shield Healthcare. So my presentation is on the role of leucine in the management of poor ovarian reserve patients. Ma'am has very beautifully covered the definition that there is a reduced capacity of the ovaries to produce oocytes. The oocytes which are produced, they are of poor quality, and the severe form of POR can be labeled as premature ovarian failure. The Bologna criteria is also has been covered beautifully by month. So the Poseidon criteria. Various risk factors are already there, as mom has already suggested, like advanced reproductive age, smoking, family history, premature career, ovarian surgeries, or mosaicism. So these are the various risk factors. Uh, the literature says that approximately 10% of women undergoing IVF show poor response to gonadotropin stimulation. But obviously, the incidence may be much, much higher in the population, and it is not, exact number is not available because not everyone comes for the evaluation, complete evaluation, and IVF therapy. So currently, the 10% women in IVF centers, that is what is seen with POR. Since we are discussing discussing POR, so a little bit quickly, I'll cover the folliculogenesis as well. So it is a complex process, but a very controlled process, and that is how the ovarian reserve is maintained throughout the reproductive age, and the ovaries do not get exhausted prematurely. So the primordial follicles remain the dormant follicles, and then they lead to then they undergo activation and formation of primary and secondary follicles. And this development is under the influence of AMH, and from secondary to small antral and a large antral follicular development is under the influence of FSH. Then there is the estrogen which is secreted, and that has a negative impact on FSH as well. So that's how we avoid the excessive, I mean, because of decrease in FSH, that is how we avoid the excessive or multiple follicular development or excessive oocyte development. So in this folliculogenesis, there is a role of mTOR signaling, and that we will quickly go through this. So in the control follicular activation and development, as I said, there is a role of mTOR pathway. This mTOR is a protein kinase which is involved in cell growth and proliferation, and it has, of course, a role in oocyte maturation as well, as it is in this picture. So this mTOR has a various protein complexes like mTOR complex 1, so C1, which has important role in cell maturation development. These are activated by TSC1 and TSC2. These are the sensors, what we are seeing over here, and they maintain a feedback mechanism on this complexes. So the sensors are also proteins, and they are coded by TSC1 and TSC2 genes. These are the tumor suppressor genes, and any mutations in genes can give rise to new cancer formations. So that's the role of mTOR pathway in cancer. But we also know that in follicular maturation and development, which is a controlled process, what we need is the stimulation of this mTOR complexes one. So if you want oocyte growth, then this activation of mTOR complexes is very much necessary. That is the take-home message for us. So the next question is, how are we going to activate this mTOR complex one? So the answer is leucine. So leucine is a essential amino acid. So obviously it is not synthesized in the body, but the source of leucine is diet. So in the left-hand side, what we see is the metabolism of leucine. That is not important to us right now. What is important is its role of leucine on activation of this mTOR pathway, and which further gets into protein synthesis, like leucine acts as a precursor for this protein synthesis. And what we have already seen in the previous slide is mTOR activation definitely helps in oocyte maturation and growth. So then, do we have a data of in patients, or a clinical data of leucine in POR patients? And yes, we do have Indian patient data. So let us understand what is the this is a pilot observational study evaluating the effect of a leucine-free treatment on ovarian response and embryo quality in poor response of patients undergoing controlled ovarian stimulation. So what is the objective? I'm sorry, what is the objective of this study? The objective is what is the change in the ovarian response and embryo quality is seen after 90 days of treatment with the L-leucine in POR patients undergoing controlled ovarian stimulation. So this is a pilot study, as I said earlier. It's in the tertiary care fertility clinic. 30 patients were enrolled. All these patients were diagnosed with POR and they have a history of failed IVF cycle earlier. These patients were supplemented with 800 milligram of L-leucine. It is the capsules are taken once a day for 90 days. And then they underwent a second cycle of control ovarian stimulation. So what are the results? The results, what we have seen is statistically significant improvement in AFC, significant improvement in oocyte count as well. There is a better quality M2 oocytes are available, and the grade A embryos also are statistically significantly more. I mean, good types of embryo are also more in these patients after receiving leucine therapy. So therefore, we are concluding that there is a statistical significant increase in AFC count, oocyte retrieved, and number of grade A embryos. So this increase in grade A embryos definitely helps in better pregnancy rate. That will translate into better pregnancy rate. And for a poor responder, one extra oocyte or embryo definitely increases the chances of better pregnancy and a possibility to avoid donor egg program. So 800 milligram of L-leucine, so this offers a hope to a POR patients in improving the ovarian response and embryo quality. So we recommend leucine, that is the mTOR 800, that's our brand. 800 milligram of leucine is there, one capsule daily, and around 6 to 8 weeks of treatment before ovarian stimulation. That is what we recommend. So this is our data in POR patients. So thank you. So that was my quick presentation. So thank you, ma'am. And I'll quickly take the various questions. The first question is, ma'am, from Dr. Shilpa. The question is, in clinical scenario, the lady is around 36 years old. Her AFC count is 6. And if we plan dual stimulation, then what could be the protocol? So she wants detailed information about the protocol. Hello, am I audible? Ma'am, you are on mute, so you need to unmute it.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Shilpa. Yeah, actually, we'll do the follicular phase stimulation just like how we do regularly. Like we start gonadotropins from day 2 and then add on the antagonist when the follicle either by fixed dose or fixed day protocol or depending on the follicular size. Then we'll trigger and get the oocytes just like how we do for normal stimulation. But here we wouldn't give progesperons. We will not plan for embryo transfers. On the day 16 after the ultrasound scan, we start recombinant FSH or HMG from day 16 again, and then we'll do the scan just as usual how we do for the first follicular phase stimulation, like after 4 or 5 days of stimulation. And once the follicle is again 14 millimeters, we add on the antagonist. And the rest of the treatment protocol will be the same as in follicular phase.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Ma'am, there are a lot of feedback that everybody has liked your presentation very much. So a lot of thank you messages and excellent messages we have received. One question is there from Dr. Vijaya Bharti that what is the impact of tubectomy on ovarian reserve, and any advices to be given?
It is my observation that women who had tubectomy, though they have good ovarian reserve, we end up getting less number of follicles and also poor quality oocytes. This is mainly because of the effect on the ovarian blood supply. So whenever we are doing tubectomy or any procedures on the tubes also, I would recommend that we'll be away from the blood vessels that are going to the ovary and also to the uterus, because there is some impact on the endometrial thickening also. So whenever we are doing surgery, especially in women who want to conceive, it's better that we be cautious when ligating the tubes or any other procedure in the pelvis.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, there are multiple questions on gonadotropin doses. So, little more additional information about the doses and yeah.
Especially in women who with poor ovarian reserve, the dose what we use makes a lot of difference. First thing is we have to synchronize the cohort patient who starts stimulation. For synchronization, we have the molecules that we happen to use are either 4 milligrams of estrogen 5 days before the expected start of period, or the OC pill for 12 to 16 days, and then once a 5 days washout period is given, then we start the stimulation. When the stimulation, the dose depends upon the age of the woman, the previous response and the dose that has been used, and the BMI of the woman also is very, very important. If the woman is overweight but the BMI is high, like 30 or 35, if you give a 150 dose, it wouldn't work in the same way that it works in women who has a BMI of 22. So always when you decide on your dose, you have to look at the BMI of the woman. And coming to the poor ovarian response patients, recently there is a publication from Humayden saying that in the Poisson group, you have to decide which dose you have to give. And what they have noted is getting even one oocyte more than normal will increase the chance of getting a blastocyst by 25%. So it's better that we give a higher dose. When we mean to say higher dose, not more than 300, either a 225 international units of a recombinant FSH or a 300 international units of recombinant FSH. But with this dose, if you have seen not a very good response, then they recommended to add recombinant LH in that particular cycle. Whenever you have noticed that the response is not good, you will add either 75 international units or 150 international units. This only applies to poor responders.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. The next question is based on age. I mean, young age and old age. Is there a differences in the stimulation, or is there any preferences in protocols? So that's the question by Dr. Srinivasan.
So previously, what we used to think is in older age women, they will have definitely poor ovarian response, and they would benefit from getting, or women whoever is older and also who has poor ovarian reserve will benefit from getting urinary gonadotropins, which will have both LH and FSH activity. But recently, this Poseidon group of people have recommended that women who are older and who have poor ovarian reserve also will benefit from recombinant FSH instead of urinary gonadotropins. But if they also said that if there is any need of LH activity, it is better to add a recombinant LH rather than urinary LH.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. The next question is the role of letrozole in stimulation. This is a question by Dr. Srivastava.
Okay, letrozole can be added in poor ovarian reserve women, like how I have shown in few of the studies. Also in the ASRM publication on the poor ovarian reserve guideline, that it will reduce the dose of gonadotropins that is needed. So there are various ways of using letrozole along with gonadotropins. First, we'll start letrozole. Starting from day 2 to day 6, it will be 5 days. You can either use 2.5 milligrams or 5 milligrams depending upon the BMI of the woman again. And then whether you add gonadotropins simultaneously, that means along the third or fourth day or seventh day, varies depending upon the previous response of the woman. If the woman has very few follicles, you can even start the gonadotropins a little bit late, so that you wouldn't have to use more gonadotropins. By giving after the stoppage of letrozole, you will reduce the dose and the cost of the treatment.
There is one more question. I mean, Dr. Preeta Jain has asked this question. In case of dual stimulation after first OPU, when we do USS, usually we find some larger cystic areas, probably luteal cyst. So what's the question? I'm sorry, I mean, this is the only information ma'am has given. So in that case, how do we monitor follicular growth? So that's the question. Sorry.
So obviously, most of the times, if there are huge cysts, we can't go for dual stimulation. So that is one of the contraindications of stimulation in the luteal phase. But most of the women will not develop those cysts, and then we can go ahead. And cysts that are developed in the luteal phase mostly are hemorrhagic cysts. So we can identify them from the follicles that are growing. Usually, follicles are like very hypoechogenic, and hemorrhagic cysts are hyperechogenic with intervening hypoechogenic area. So that is how we identify.
All right, ma'am. Thank you. One more question. This has from Dr. Meenakshi. She says that patient is 38 years old. Her BMI is 28. AMH is 1.2. So then what could be the stimulation protocol? Any guidance and suggestions?
So you said the patient is 38 years old.
Yes.
AMH is 1.2.
Yes. And BMI is 28. So obese woman.
Not too obese.
Correct, correct.
So as I have mentioned in my slides, that we can go for agonist protocol or antagonist protocol. There is no advantage of one over the other. The only advantage is agonist protocol is like we can synchronize the follicles better. So we'll get a good cohort of follicles all at the same range. So we'll get better yield. Other than that, there is no difference. So the dose we use is 300 or 375. Why? Because her BMI is slightly higher. That is the reason a 75 IO higher dose will she will benefit from. And also the other thing is whether you use urinary gonadotropins or recombinant. So far, I have mentioned always that in poor responders or expected poor responder women, recombinant FSH will be useful. But those are the studies done in Western countries. But in my own practice, I happen to use always urinary gonadotropins, and that too 375 in that range because her BMI is slightly higher. If we have to use recombinant FSH, then the cost of the treatment will almost double up. So that is one of the hindrances that we face in our society for in using recombinant FSH.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, there is another question from Dr. Meenakshi. So can we give stimulation with endometrioma?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
Stimulation with endometrioma.
Yeah, definitely we can give. Recent studies have shown that stimulation, we don't have to remove all endometriomas. And especially in women who had a surgery before, repeat surgery is not recommended at all. So if the endometrioma is like less than 4 centimeters, and if it is not coming in your way of oocyte pickup, or the patient doesn't have any pain, then there is no need to remove the endometrioma. We can comfortably go ahead and do stimulation and do the transfer.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. So thank you. Thanks a lot. It was excellent presentation, and thank you for giving us time, accepting our invitation as well. So thank you very much. And thank you for the audience. Thank you for joining on this Sunday evening and giving your questions too. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for attending.
Thank you. So we are closing this session, this webinar. Thank you.